Good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us for our last webinar series of 2019. Our presenter is none other than Matt Greenwood. So before we start, as usual, I'd like to introduce Matt, give you guys a little bit of a brief background on him. So first of all, Matt, thank you so much for taking the time out of your evening to organize and present on this topic that I know you are so passionate about and have had a lot of involvement in. So thank you from us on behalf of that. And
thank you, Ahmed. Thank you for having me.
no problem. And so let's begin. Let's talk a little bit about yourself, and then we'll talk about today. So Matt Greenwood is a passionate advocate for the inclusion and accessibility of soccer in all its forms, from the development of innovative soccer programs in the UK since 2003, and his first certification as a football coach in 2002. From there, Matt moved to Ontario in 2006 and began assisting with many clubs in the development of their programs. During his time as club development manager with Ontario Soccer, accessible programs in clubs grew from 5 clubs to 19, with the last count and expanding to an array of club resources supported by a diverse group of stakeholders. Matt has been the executive director of Pickering Soccer Club since 2016. He coaches the Pickering Soccer Club blind soccer team, and in his spare time volunteers with Ontario Blind Sport to further grow the number of blind soccer programs in Ontario. So, as you can tell, today's webinar series will focus on, and primarily, if I'm not mistaken, Matt, blind soccer and how to implement it within your organizations, correct?
We'll certainly talk a bit about blind soccer, but yeah, we'll try and cover as many bases as we can in the next hour or so.
Perfect. So one last little bit of building on that. So as we have it here, we know that soccer clubs offering a program for athletes was at an all-time high in 2015, with 19 clubs from Windsor to Ottawa and Sudbury in the north. That number has remained steady, but there's certainly room for more. As you mentioned, this workshop will look at the basic steps of how to establish a program, but more importantly, the why around inclusive and accessible programming. This webinar, as you mentioned, is intended for anyone designated in a club to lead program development or inclusion, or for anyone with a real passion. So without further ado, Matt, I'll pass it on to you. You can build on that a little bit and talk a little bit more, guide us through how today's webinar will go. And then the reins are yours, my friend.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Armin. Thank you very much to those listening and looking in. We're going to cover a lot of information in the next hour or so. And I'm always here as a resource. So if there are things that come up that you don't get a chance to ask tonight or that you don't think of, by all means, reach out to me and there's some contact details at the end of the presentation. So disability soccer, and where do we start? We're going to run through a variety of different subjects this evening, including the medical versus social model of disability, the inclusion spectrum, a practical session and sort of summarize what that would look like, the Canadian player pathway and where we're at right now, club concerns and some of the typical questions that might come from board or club members when the concept of establishing or creating an accessible program gets put to them. And then some resources, some signposts to help you start up your program. And there's some really good ones out there that I'm keen to share with you. So as Ahmed said, a little bit about me. In 2015, I was fortunate enough to be the co-chair for the para soccer and the blind soccer events at the Toronto 2015 Para Pan Am Games. And sort of by default, the year before that, in 2014, I was the chair for the America Cup, which is the para soccer competition for the Americas. And we hosted all of this at the U of T complex as a sort of a test event ready for Toronto 2015. And as Ahmed had also mentioned, currently the executive director at Pickering Football Club since 2016, and very proud to have one of the best accessibility programs in the country here when it comes to accessible soccer. And prior to that, the club development manager at Ontario Soccer. So a real great opportunity to see the breadth and depth of programs that are out there across Ontario, and also to be able to connect from time to time with colleagues in the other provinces to see what they've got and to be able to share best practice when it came to accessible and inclusive soccer programs. So I wanted to put this here because I often talk about putting a stake in the ground. You know, there's a lot of talk, a lot of plans, a lot of ideas out there, but at some point we have to put a stake in the ground on what we want to do. So this quote I particularly like from the Tamarack Institute. You put your stake in the ground. It does not mean that there is no flexibility, but if you've done your research and have your evidence, it is easier to engage others. The engagement is focused and driving toward change. This is really important because those two first pieces around research and evidence are out there. There's fantastic information about how important multi-sport programs can be, and certainly inclusive, accessible soccer programs are no different. The research on there about the benefits to children, youth, and to adults is widely spread, and there are some great resources, as I mentioned earlier. So we know it's right. We know it's a good thing to do, and we know it can really be positive for change. So now we have to look at the engagement and having that focused so that we actually move in the right direction and we grow that number of clubs from the 19 to many, many more. So why do people play soccer? For those able-bodied or those without a disability, it's important to stay in shape, to have fun, be part of a team. Typically, it's a passion for the game that might have grown from seeing a highlight on TV or from other family members. It helps develop social skills. It's a great opportunity to meet people, especially when you think of the success of adult leagues and co-ed leagues in this day and age. It's hugely popular for networking and meeting people and developing bonds that can potentially last a lifetime, from those boys and girls that we played with in elementary and high school that are still now lifelong friends, even after we've finished being quite so active on the soccer field. So for people with a disability, it's really not all that different. You'd probably suggest that the added benefits are that they may have something to prove. They've always been told that they're not able to do it, or it's not for them, or it's too aggressive. So they have something to prove. And you could argue that a lot of other people do as well that are not with a disability. It's a huge sense of purpose and belonging. So while we really appreciate the fact that we get to meet people and develop bonds, this is a great opportunity for people with a disability to have that sense of being part of a team and having a really good purpose. It gives them an opportunity to find a peer group, and also gets them out of the house. Typically, we've seen many years of children and youth in the school system that end up having to sit on the sides or be the scorekeeper, or even worse, go to the library and catch up on reading a book rather than actually being active in the session. So even during phys ed time in school, their opportunity to be active is limited. So the more we can do to make those sessions accessible and inclusive, the better. Physical activity is vital to every child's development. Kids who regularly participate in recreational activity and organised sport are physically healthier than those who don't, and are far more likely to become healthier adults. Participation also boosts mental development by offering opportunities to experiment, create, problem solve, and build self-awareness. From a social perspective, participation allows kids to interact with others, learn social norms, improve communication skills, and develop leadership abilities. Despite the clear benefits of participating in sport and recreation, kids with disabilities are too often not in the game at all. As a consequence, they miss out on key childhood experiences, opportunities to learn fundamental skills, and vital physical health benefits that last far into the future. All of this means that kids with disabilities do not have the same opportunities as their peers, a gap which only continues to grow as they develop into adults. So with that in mind, there are actually more models for disability, but these are the two key models that are often referred to: the medical model and the social model. So historically, the medical model was society's way of thinking. So if you had a child with a disability, it was the child that was faulty. It involved diagnosis of what was, in inverted commas, wrong with them. There would be labeling. The impairment becomes the focus of the attention, not the child. The assessment, the monitoring, the programs of therapy that are imposed on that child, youth, or adult, there will often be segregation and alternative services, and we think about alternative schools. Their ordinary needs are put on hold, so the focus is on the disability and not just being a typical kid. Re-entry, if normal enough, or permanent exclusion, so they're constantly being graded and assessed to see if they, again, in inverted commas, normal enough to maintain a lifestyle within society. And society remains unchanged. Those group of individuals are labelled and kept somewhat isolated. So the somewhat reassuring thing is that we've now moved to a social model of thinking, very much kind of like the LTAD model for a player-centered approach. We're talking about the child being centered or the individual being valued, their strengths and needs defined by self and others, not just by others, that they get a stake and they get a say in how they want to be perceived. We identify the barriers and we develop solutions. Probably one of the most common practical examples of that is the automatic door, whether it's a push button or a infrared sensor that notes somebody's in front of the door. You could argue that those are great accessibility and great for people with a disability, but how many times have we experienced, having our hands full of bags of shopping, and it's great to be able to just reach out a knee or a toe and be able to touch the button and get the doors open. So it benefits much wider society. We focus on outcome-based program designs. Resources are made available to ordinary services, so it's not just isolated to that very niche part of the community. There's training for parents and professionals. This is a perfect example of that, where this may just be kept within the club environment or within the club itself. We want to share our experiences amongst the parent group and also professionals that are out there that will learn about inclusive soccer being an opportunity for their children and their clients. Relationships are nurtured, diversity is welcomed, and the child is included. So they're actively included in part of that discussion. And society evolves. So on the face of it, some great progress, some positive sound bites there. Of course, the devil is in the detail in actually ensuring that those barriers are brought down and are addressed. To meaningful competition, and I'd expand that to meaningful competition or experience, because this really talks about their opportunity to play in games, in competition, but also in their training environments as well when they're there with their peers. But it needs defining. Let's understand why it's so important and how that might look. So defining it, every game, practice, or competition provides the right level of challenges for all participants in soccer. In a soccer context, this would include physical, technical, tactical, psychological, or social factors. And we'll come back to that a little bit later. Why is it important? For enjoyment and satisfaction, any program needs to be challenging and developmental. Not too easy, it's going to cause boredom just with any group of players, or too hard, and you'll start to see frustration, again, with any group of players. While the club's understanding of how to plan for and manage first involvement in a session will help make the initial experience a positive one, and will set the stage for second involvement strategies, we ultimately want to be able to maintain participation, enjoyment, and satisfaction over time and build quality participation. Quality participation occurs when players find their involvement in parasport satisfying, enjoyable, and leading to outcomes they consider important. Our goal in grassroots soccer is to create that great first experience for players and their parents, and to ensure that their involvement leads to outcomes that are important to them, such as fun, friendship, and fitness. The Canadian Disability Participation Project, or CDPP, is a Canada-wide network of community organisations and researchers committed to improving physical activity participation levels for all Canadians. They recently created a blueprint for building quality participation in sport for children and youth with a disability. It was developed through an extensive multi-step process that considered the best of current research, evidence, and expert feedback. The essence of the blueprint is that quality participation is the direct result of a player's positive quality experiences. Repeated and sustained exposure to quality experiences should contribute to lasting quality participation. The presence in any sport program of 6 building blocks: belonging, autonomy, mastery, challenge, engagement, and meaning allows players to have quality experiences. In turn, these 6 building blocks can only be present in a meaningful way when they're supported by a solid foundation consisting of physical, program, and social environments that are welcoming, accessible, and supportive. And I do have a link at the end of the presentation for the CDPP, so you'll be able to follow up and see some of the great content that they have on their website. So again, as with any player, how might this look? We don't want them struggling and striving to keep up. We want them challenged appropriately. There will always be players in the group that are forging ahead and need that next challenge. And then there will always be some that are striving to keep up, but we ideally want them to all be challenged appropriately. And that's our challenge as coaches, to make sure we know what our players' needs are. So the inclusion spectrum. The inclusion spectrum gives the coach or teacher different ways of coaching football to mixed ability groups without focusing on the individual impairments. Instead, it focuses on the football or soccer and how football can be presented to suit all players. The inclusion spectrum has 4 overlapping, I was going to say distinct, but overlapping formats that ensure that everybody can participate. Open games. In open games, everyone in the group is able to participate with minimal or no adaptation or modification. This might include things like warm-ups, integrated games where people are in different zones, individual skill development, which will be very much one-on-one, and then cooldowns. Modified games occur when changes are made to the game or activity in order to promote inclusion. And again, no different to any other session that you would coach within soccer. You alter the space, you adapt the rules, and you vary the equipment to ensure that everybody gets the best out of that session. With soccer for athletes with a disability, that varying equipment may include incredibly large soccer balls, tactile soccer balls that have something that you can grip, different surfaces on them, brightly coloured soccer balls, all shapes and sizes and textures that can engage the wide range of athletes that you'll have in your session. Parallel games. When everyone plays the same game or game theme, but they're organised in ability groups, where the activity is set as a level appropriate to each age group. Again, no different to what you would see in a typical soccer session where you want to tier your players, whether it's 1, 2, or 3 tiers. You'd have those different levels of ability, and they would be challenged in slightly different ways, ultimately working on the same technique or the same skill. And finally, disability soccer. So playing in impairment-specific groups, either for safety reasons or as part of the competitive structure. So certainly at the international level and national level, it's very specific on the disability groups and who can and cannot participate and who's eligible. As you move your way further down the ladder to some provincial competitions and then regional and grassroots, there's a lot more of a pan-disability opportunity where different athletes can come together on the same field. But 2 distinct ones there, blind soccer and power chair soccer, really have to be managed on their own, in their own environment. Blind soccer, obviously the fact that all of the players on the outfield will be wearing eye shades means that any other sighted players could pose a possible obstacle to them and a danger. And power chair soccer as well. Power chairs are incredibly heavy. You certainly don't want one of those running across your foot. So it's probably better to have them in their own session, in their own competition structure, unless you're going to sort of zone them into their own area where they compete against each other on the field. So again, not too much different to your typical session. You're still going to focus and want to develop all four corners of the four-corner model: technical and tactical, psychological, social, and physical. While the technical is probably quite straightforward, the other three components are really important. As I mentioned earlier, this is an area that is really underserved for this particular group of athletes. So their opportunity to experience something very different in soccer, and the different skills that you're going to leave them with, is hugely important to test their understanding, give them the opportunity for some of their own decision making, and for you as a coach, very clearly being able to see the confidence at the end of a session when these players come off the field is probably one of the most rewarding things that comes from a session. The social components, again, as we mentioned earlier, really important. A lot of these athletes come to you from environments where they're with other adults, whether it be caregivers or their parents or teachers. So an opportunity for them to connect with other kids or other youth at the same age is hugely important. It gives them an opportunity to work on their communication, build their self-esteem, and have them experience being part of a team, even if that team is just two people, or it's them and a coach or them and a guide. It's that opportunity for that connection, which is hugely, hugely important. And finally, physical. As I mentioned earlier, there's a strong feeling out there that there's not enough support for physical education teachers or special education support and the guidance that these athletes would need in the school system. So an offer for participation, physical activity is fantastic, and you can really run through a full components, drills, call them what you like, but hugely valuable, hugely important for this group of athletes. So when planning your session, review impairment-specific resources. I'd strongly recommend hitting some websites, doing your research on specific needs of different groups of athletes, but don't overthink it. Don't overthink it. There's a huge risk of paralysis by analysis. You'll see so many different theories and recommendations. If you have 15 athletes with a disability on the field, there's a risk that you'll just freeze because there are so many different things that you want to do. So take a step back and don't overthink it. Come back to the fact that the session needs to be fun and engaging, and everybody needs to participate. And there are a lot of great session plans in the Ontario Soccer and Canada Soccer guides when it comes to active start and fundamental sessions. A lot of those can be adapted or used straight out of the guide with a group of athletes with a disability. And session planning groups, one of the great experiences that we have here with Pickering Football Club is our pool of coaches that volunteer with our All Abilities program, and the fact that they discuss their experiences at the end of each session, and that helps with the planning for the next week and how they're going to deliver or what they're going to deliver. So you get the experience from each of the other coaches that's with you, or maybe some tricks or strategies to manage a certain player who might be particularly difficult one week and absolutely fine the next week. So once you've done your practical session, there's obviously a review. And again, as any coach knows, it's important to review a session and how things went well. And often we will seek feedback from the players, whether it's by asking them one-on-one as a group or simply looking at their body language and the smiles on their faces. We know that it's been a positive session and we need to assess whether we achieve what we wanted. But a key component to this that we often shy away from when it comes to able-bodied soccer is feedback from the parents. So often that conversation with the parent beforehand will help set the tone of the session, and you'll know how your player is feeling and what their specific needs are. But after the session, that parent will also be able to provide you with some great insights into what they saw and anything that the player may have shared with them from the previous week. So seek guidance and input from the parents or the caregiver, whoever comes along with that athlete, to get more insight from them. and then reflect on how you feel the session went, how you came across, if you connected with the athlete. A lot of times it will be very much more one-on-one. So did that connection really happen? And are you able to see progress? And sometimes progress might not be technical. Sometimes progress is just the fact that that athlete is comfortable with you, and feels comfortable enough to share with you and be with you for the duration of that session. Effective communication, and that's important with any group of players. As you work down these bullets, again, a lot of these are typical with any group of players that you'd work with, but know your player. So again, with any group, knowing what your player's individual needs are, and with athletes with disability, any particular triggers or habits. There are often sort of sensitivities to, we find people coming into a soccer dome, the air pressure is much more noticeable for them, and they'll make mention of that, and maybe there's some discomfort there. And a lot of times athletes that are on the autism spectrum find it hard to focus when there are so many other noises going on. So think about ways that you can maybe run the session at a quieter time when the facility might not be as busy, or whether there's something just at the other end of the facility but not right next to you on the neighbouring field, because it can be very distracting. So know your player, know your group of players, and what their needs are. Tell them what you're going to do, what the session is going to be, what that technique might be, and of course show. We do this in every coaching course: tell, show, and then question. So make sure you're listening for the answers. Don't put a question out there for the sake of it, but put a question out there that you want to understand, you want to confirm that they do understand what you're talking about, and they are learning from what you're being able to tell them. And then what's rare, particularly with athletes with a disability, and specifically with the blind group, is the ability to physically manipulate their body. And of course, this is important that you have the conversation with them. If there's a parent nearby, you make sure that they're within eyesight of you. Often when I work with adult players, I'll let them know that I'm going to go down onto my knee and I'm going to adjust their foot, and I'm going to let them know whether it's their left foot or their right foot. If I'm going to raise it, I encourage them to put their hand on my shoulder so they can maintain balance. So you help them understand and paint that picture, rather than trying to talk them through it. Again, the metaphor of painting that picture. To try and explain to somebody how to pass a ball with the inside of their foot can be quite complex when you start to talk about the exact angle of the foot. Sometimes going down and actually being able to move their foot into position is a great help, and something that's quite rare. You wouldn't necessarily see this with other groups of soccer players, but certainly within the blind population, this is really important, really helpful. So soccer for people with a disability in Canada. Right now there are sort of three distinct paths, and if I start on the right, Special Olympics Canada and its provincial associations and then its regional organisations is really well structured, really well organised. They run provincial championships. They actually partner with Ontario Soccer for a Special Olympics Ontario Cup, and then that moves right the way through to Special Olympics national championships and even their Special Olympics games that they run that are hugely received. Canadian Deaf Sport, the Canadian Deaf Sport Association, supports players through its provincial deaf sport associations, and has in the past had a men's deaf futsal team and an 11-a-side team. I'm not quite sure if they're currently active, but that was their pathway, certainly up till a couple of years ago. And then the one that may be more well-known, more common, is Canada Soccer's men's sevens para soccer team. And that's comprised of athletes that either have cerebral palsy, have had a traumatic brain injury, or have had a stroke. And that program runs across the country. There are many scouting opportunities for players to be seen and be visited by the head coach, Drew Ferguson. His contact details are on the Canada Soccer website. So please reach out to him if you know of at this stage, young male players within your club or within the soccer system that might be interested in trying out. In actual fact, we have two of our coaches here at Pickering Soccer Club that actually both coach within the All Abilities program that are part of that CP squad. One of them's a regular starter, and the other one is in his Drew's pool of players. So the pathways right now are limited, and that's something we really need to work on as soccer clubs, associations at the regional, district, provincial level to really start to fill in some of those gaps and ensure that there is a player pathway for male and female players in every path, as well as those that may be amputees, that use power chairs, or that are blind or visually impaired. Other countries have many pathways and are really leading the way. A lot of the information and the structures and systems are already out there. We just need to start this groundswell, and as I said at the start, put that stake in the ground to start growing our programs. So again, rather than overthinking the three pathways, if you look at the bottom there, we've got grassroots pan-disability club programs. That's sort of a phrase I use as a catch-all because I know certain clubs have disability soccer, Special Olympics soccer, we have our All Abilities. There are many different ways to describe this, but really when it comes down to it, it's grassroots soccer clubs that run a range of different disability groups on the same field, sometimes at the same time, to ensure that children, youth, adults are getting opportunities, experience, and getting to play the game of soccer. And then in due course, maybe some of those players peel away to become specifically a Special Olympics athlete or a CP7 soccer athlete or a visually impaired athlete. But at the grassroots level, our real power and influence is in creating disability soccer programs that can serve every possible player. And then the system will build from there. So that may include impairment-specific programs, Special Olympics programs. Ontario Blind Sport Association does their own come and try events where they will go out into the schools and offer soccer and a variety of other sports to school children with a visual impairment. So that's the Canadian player pathway. But as I mentioned, an awful lot of work still to be done to make that something we can be proud of. So at the provincial level, Ontario Soccer has grassroots coordinators that are out and cover the province on a daily basis. They can be contacted via Ontario Soccer for input and guidance on making soccer programs more inclusive and accessible, or even just getting one started. Last year, Ontario Soccer ran a Accessible Soccer Fun Day, which was a fantastic day with about 40 or 50 athletes with a range of different disabilities, but coming from about 7 or 8 of the clubs across Ontario that run their own programs. So that was a fantastic event, and it was run as a sort of a station format. So rather than having games with a whole variety of different needs on the field, it was run as a station, so each club could stay together but work on different skills and skill development and play their own little 3-on-3 scrimmage on one of the fields as well. So a really great model to introduce accessible soccer into a club is via that station model, maybe bringing in coaches with specific skill sets to man each of those stations. I just want to mention that picture in the top right there. Patty Spina on the right with the hat has been the coach of the Fergus-Alora District Soccer Special Needs Program for the last 8 or 9 years, and a fantastic program that has about 40 or 50 adults with a disability. Is pretty unique in the province and in the country, that they really have a huge group of adults that come out every week for practice, and they run a fantastic festival in July when it's always sweltering. But talking about that social piece earlier, a huge part of that festival that's run at Fergus-Alora District Soccer is the social piece. It's a band, it's some live music, it's the fire engine, it's the food and the clowns. it's a whole bunch of things that really keep the athletes engaged, and a fantastic example of how to run an inclusive, accessible festival. So at the grassroots level, and I apologise if I've missed anybody off this list, but this is a range of clubs that we've got out there from east to west, and even from time to time up in the north in Sudbury, running programs for athletes with a disability. Different names to their programs, but ultimately this is about getting children and youth and adults on the field. And you can visit each of their websites or contact the club for more information on when their programs happen. I imagine most of them now will be moving indoors for the winter, so a great time to reach out and get some contact details for them on their programs. So thank you to those clubs. You do a fantastic job. I would estimate across those clubs, we've probably got about 500 players, 500 athletes with a disability participating regularly in soccer. And that's a huge step. Again, another huge stake in the ground. The next question or our next challenge to each other would be, when do we get to 1,000? When do we get to 2,000 players? So the work is always going on, and the energy that happens in these clubs to make these programs happen is fantastic. So often one of the barriers, and I mentioned sort of paralysis by analysis earlier, that can happen on the field, absolutely, but overthinking what a session should look like and what it should include. But also on the other side, the board and the administration may have concerns as well. And I see that quite often, so I thought I'd answer some questions here that we often see. So do we need to have qualified coaches? Yes, you do. Ideally, even in the recreational level of programming, you should have qualified coaches in there that may have an active start or a fundamentals qualification, but also look for teachers. Seek out, special education assistants, teachers, people that have a kinesiology background. We often find a lot of students from U of T that support our program that are actually kinesiology students that want to specialize in this area in the future. So you may have some people in the club that would be interested in coming back for the summer to coach, that have great backgrounds and great experiences. So don't limit yourself to just having them be a coach in the classic sense of the word and how we're used to understanding it, but cast your net a little bit wider, because there are some great expertise out there, and people that, when they think about the opportunity to be involved in soccer, see the disability work that they do in a whole different light, because of that power of soccer to be so engaging and so important to that athlete, that participant with a disability. Who should lead the program? Ultimately, passionate people that really have this to heart. I often find there are two groups here. One is the parent that, no matter what, my kid is going to participate. I don't care if your club's telling me you don't have a program. I'm going to create that program, and I'm going to find other parents that need it, and we're going to make that program happen. That certainly happens on a pretty regular basis. But on the other side of it are people that just get it, people that just understand, and there are great people out there in many of those clubs that I just showed you. Pat Espina, as I mentioned at Fergus Allura, Franco Taverna here at Pickering Football Club, that just understand and get it, that there's a really big opportunity and need for more people to play soccer, and there's no reason why this group of athletes shouldn't be on the field, and it really is a win-win from all perspectives. So as long as they're passionate, they're motivated. We often hear the story here at Pickering, where our All Abilities program in the first year, and this is going back 11 or 12 years now, started off with 3 athletes. The next week went down to 2 athletes, and the week after that went down to 1. And then it started to pick up. And now we're looking at regularly 70 athletes during the winter season and up to 80 or 90 athletes during the outdoor summer season. So you have to be patient. There has to be some networking. But in this day and age of social media, it's really easy to get people connected and make people aware of the program that you have running. and be honest about it. You know, you're trying your best and you're learning as you go. That's where you pull in other people to help and bring their expertise to the program. Are there added insurance needs? There aren't. This would just be like any other recreational registration. So there isn't anything needed from an insurance perspective, but it's important to ask a few more additional questions. So what we will often do is register players at the club as part of our All Abilities program, but then we'll follow up with them to see if there are any other additional needs that the parent wasn't able to or didn't want to put down in the form. And that really just helps us ensure that we deliver a positive, fun, and safe session. We had a situation 4 or 5 years ago with a young boy that wanted to play soccer. He was non-verbal and he used a wheelchair, and he also had a personal support worker that was with him most of the day. But he was adamant that he wanted to play soccer. His parents were very keen to get him on a soccer field. And they went to the local club, and the club ended up reaching out to Ontario Soccer to say, hey, what do? We don't think we can do this. It sounds risky. So we had a number of emails backwards and forwards with our insurance provider. We came up with a number of solutions. In the end, what we did with that player was had him and his personal support worker on the field, both wearing the team jerseys. They played a full 9v9 grass field, so I think the personal support worker must have been incredibly fit getting up and down that field. But what we did was worked with the club to put some safe parameters in place. So the player, the athlete with a disability, was assigned to a team that was a good-natured team, a positive team with a good coach that wasn't your A1 win at all costs type of guy. He understood this was about participation, inclusion, and everybody having fun. The club was also able to schedule the same referee each week. So even though the opposing team was different, the referee was able to build up a familiarity and know how the game would play out or what sort of situations would arise. So that referee would come and speak to both teams and let them know that there would be an athlete on the field with a wheelchair and a personal support worker, and encourage them to play safely, play sensibly, and play with care. It was then up to the two coaches to go over to their parent group and speak to the parents and let them know what was going to happen, and to let any parent know that if they weren't comfortable with this, their child didn't have to participate. It wasn't an over the night email. It took a number of steps backwards and forwards to get to that resolution, but ultimately the kid got on the field. His first game that he played, the ball bounced up and hit him in the head. There was a deathly silence because everybody panicked and worried what was going to happen, until they realized that he was belly aching, laughing because it was that much fun. He got his first real experience of playing soccer and he was out on the field. So all of those steps, all of those emails and all those phone calls got us to that magical moment, and he played the rest of the season and had a blast. So it's worth it in the end. And there are many more anecdotes like that, or cases, should I say, where something that seemed impossible is possible with the right amount of legwork. And that's where I suggest reaching out to other clubs, reaching out to our guys here at the All Abilities program, or to myself directly for some input and some guidance on how to make sure every kid gets on the field. Is the program more expensive to run? No, it's not. But keep in mind that often parents are coming from a difficult situation where they may be out of pocket for additional transport needs for buses, additional care or educational services that they're paying for, or medication. So there may be other things that are pressing on their purse strings beyond just playing soccer. The good thing about this is that these sorts of programs are incredibly popular with sponsors and incredibly well valued, because you're doing something so visible and so important in the community. So establishing a program and identifying one or two key sponsors that can help with that subsidy piece is a great first step to get you on your way. How do we find volunteers? They're in your club. The great thing that we did here at Pickering Football Club when we first started to see a rise was approached our U11 and U12 girls competitive teams. Not being politically correct, but the girls have a better attention span. They don't just want to go and pummel soccer balls into the back of the net like the boys teams do. There's more of an interest and a care and a willingness to learn and support other players. And these girls have been fantastic, and we've seen it each year as they've sort of come through the club. And a lot of those players have gone on to careers in nursing or kinesiology, or working with people with a disability in the community. So it's a great opportunity for them. They get their volunteer hours, and you get people that can really work with that athlete group and demonstrate some good soccer qualities. Where can we find more information? So our next slide. There are a lot of resources out there. As I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of good content. The top left corner there, you'll see a Coaching Disabled Footballers course. That's a course out of England that's been going almost 20 years now, and continues to advance and refine their programming. And in the bottom right hand there, Special Olympics soccer documents going back to the mid-80s. So there are resources out there. The most recent one, I believe, from Special Olympics was a couple of years ago as an online, as a download, PDF download. So there are great resources out there. There are two really good ones that came out over the last 3 years from Ontario Soccer. The Everyone Plays document that you'll see some of our volunteers there in the top right, Dave, Franco, and T, that helped put that guide together. And then the Achieving Accessibility guide that you can just see down there in the middle, which shows Jen, one of our former coaches, coaching a blind soccer player, or a player experiencing blind soccer. Both of those guides, Everyone Plays and Achieving Accessibility, are on the Ontario Soccer website, and they're fantastic resources. Achieving Accessibility talks about the needs for soccer clubs and community groups to be compliant when it comes to the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disability Act, which is now provincial law, and there are requirements in there for any business when it comes to customer service and being prepared for serving people with a disability. The other guide, Everyone Plays, is a fantastic resource which really gets into the nitty-gritty of what a session can look like, what you should think about when it comes to marketing your program and who you should be reaching out to market your program, and goes into a bit more depth on that quality participation that we talked about before. So please visit the Ontario Soccer website to get hold of those two resources. And by all means, search the web. There are fantastic resources out there from across the globe. Online, as we mentioned, just the Ontario Soccer webpage there, and I imagine this webinar will be shared, so you'll be able to follow through with these links. So the Ontario Soccer website has those resources available on their page, as well as a guide that lists all of the clubs in Ontario right now that have inclusive, accessible programs. So have a look at those and see if there are any in your community. The Canadian Disability Participation Project, the link is there to their sport and exercise components. There's some great resources there on what they're doing and what they're finding. And then at the top there, 2 online courses. The second one there, the National Coaching Certification Program, launched about 2.5 years ago, a coaching athletes with a disability course. I believe it's about $15. It's about a 45-minute course, but it goes to your transcript as a coach, where you keep all of your other coaching records. And it's a really good kind of introduction to coaching athletes with a disability at a sort of a 30,000 feet level. The Jumpstart Coaching Kids of All Abilities was launched within the last 6 to 9 months, and is again, another fantastic resource, a lot more involved, but digs into a lot more case studies and examples of how to work with athletes with a disability in your club. Anybody who's gone through the Respecting Sport and the Respecting Sport Parent Program will pick up on the similar sort of style of that webinar, but again, another great resource to learn from. So again, I'll finalise by coming back to this. We need to put our stake in the ground. We need to start sharing the evidence that's out there and the research that backs up the need to have more of these programs in our province and in our country. And we need to make the engagement focused and driven towards change. So we'll start to set targets for more clubs, more programs, more diversity, more specific streams for athletes that may be blind or visually impaired, deaf or hearing impaired, amputee, power check. Whatever that particular athlete's need is, we can only start to work and build towards that by putting that stake in the ground at the grassroots level and starting a program right on our doorstep. So finally, thank you for your time. I think we're almost at the hour now, but here are three of the best ways to get a hold of me. I'm regularly on Twitter and regularly sharing a lot of the great content that's out there that I come across when it comes to accessible soccer and some of the programs and research that's going on out there across the world. I can be reached at mattgreenwood@rogers.com. And then finally, I have a blog that I post on from time to time that really sort of shares some of the experiences that I've had, whether it's been from para sport and para soccer events or delivering courses such as a blind soccer specific course to a community. So with that, thank you very much for your attention, and I'll pass back over to Armin.
Matt, thank you so much for your time this evening on and presenting and sharing with us regarding this topic. Personally, for me, like as you know, in my previous experience being at Pickering, I was able to go and help out a little bit as some of the coaches with the All Abilities program. But even that was just a glimpse of how many more layers there are to it. And your webinar it started to dive into that more and more, and really had me appreciate all the work that the All Abilities program put in. And as you mentioned, yeah, it's been around for 11 years, and it's not always smooth sailing, and there are speed bumps, but you have to do what you have to do to make sure soccer is accessible and inclusive to all. So again, thank you for this webinar. And we got some questions come in. So if you don't mind, I'd like to pass them along to you and see if there's any way you can help answer them. And as more come, we can ask like that. Is that all right?
Okay, sure, absolutely.
Perfect. So I know it's a little bit of a general question, obviously. And you showed from that picture, I believe there were about 15 organizations that do have some type of program of accessibility. What do you think, in your experience, are some barriers that prevent organizations from operating a soccer program or an accessible soccer program? And what are some ways to mitigate or minimize these barriers so that we can ultimately increase those organizations that offer programs across the board?
That's a good question. I think a lot of it is down to people's minds start racing when it comes to worst case scenarios. What are we going to do if this happens? We don't know how to deal with an athlete with this particular disability. Are the parents going to be more challenging? Have we got the right equipment? It just goes on and on and on. I'd say the best thing to do is simply to get along and have a look at one of these sessions in progress and see how the coaches engage with the athletes and even how the session is set up. At Pickering Football Club a couple of years ago, we were able to acquire funding and sort of created an in-the-box sort of guide. So we literally drop this program in any other club and they would be able to start their own program along sort of the All Abilities model. We've seen success with Oshawa Kicks. I think they're now into their 4th or 5th year of their All Abilities program, which they run regularly indoor and outdoor. 2 of our staff were at Bradford Soccer Club about 12 months ago to help them launch their first All Abilities program. And we certainly share as much as we can with any other club. So we're always welcome Saturday mornings from 9:30 to 11:30 here at the Pickering Football Club at the Soccer Centre to come along and see what we do and how we interact. We don't gain by keeping any of this a secret. We want more clubs to know, to learn, to understand, and to feel comfort in what they see, that gives them the reassurance that they can do it too. And Bradford Soccer Club's a great example of that. So we were able to share with them the resources, and they said, this is fantastic, love it, but we'd really like you to come and help run our first session. And so that's what we did. Two of our staff headed up there and delivered that first session to see exactly how it could be modeled and get them started and get them up and running. So more communication, exchange with some of these clubs. Cambridge Youth Soccer is another fantastic example. They called the club about a year ago, and I actually had a conference call with their board to talk about what an All Abilities program might look like. Within a month, they got it started, and now it's a flourishing program and a key part of their club structure that they're very, very proud of. So that one just started with a phone call and has grown into something successful.
That's amazing, honestly, and it goes back to what you mentioned. Like, communication and networking is key, and you kind of already there was a second question in here, but you kind of answered that, elaborating on that networking and those resources that you share. Can you talk a little bit more about what you said, that the program that you kind of just dropped and delivered to Bradford for them to understand how the program would work? That might be something that more organizations, that they start expanding, neighboring organizations could use that, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm just going to click through to this image again. So that bottom left graphic, everyone plays. Mm-hmm. A lot of the content in there came from our Pickering Football Club All Abilities in a box guide. So a lot of the content we got in there: how to set a budget, how to find your volunteers, how to approach sponsors, what a session should look like, how it aligns with LTAD principles, is all in that Everyone Plays guide, and is definitely worth a download. I'll be honest with you, I downloaded it last week. I'd forgotten all about it and forgot how much great content was in there. So that's a really good starting point for a club to have a look at, to read through and get enthused about an inclusive, accessible program. And then from there, to come and have a chat to somebody at a club like Pickering's or like Woodstock's or like Cambridge or like Bradford, one of these clubs that has a program, and pick their brains a little bit. They might come up with some other issues that they've come across, or some other successes that we hadn't even been aware of. So that's probably one of the best resources out there that can help a club get started.
Absolutely, and that's amazing. And the collaboration is key, especially with something new. And I'm thrilled to hear about the network and the camaraderie between organizations to make sure that as many inclusive and accessible programs are being delivered, and I've already shown to be growing and will continue to grow, so that this number can become higher and higher.
Yeah, what we'd like to do, and we've done over the last 4 years now, I think, and we want to continue to do, is have a component at the Ontario Soccer Summit every year where we're able to engage new clubs and even new academies into the discussion around accessible soccer and inclusive programs. But also, it's an opportunity for us to network, to catch up from last year on, what have you done since last year? Who have you found as a new sponsor or a new grant stream that might help build your programming? So it's a great opportunity every year. I thoroughly encourage coaches to get along and to look at attending that piece around accessible soccer. Or even if you're a club leader, identify that person within your club that you think will be the right person to get that program started. They might not be on your board. They might be actually volunteering with another program or a coach with another program, but they could potentially be the person that kickstarts your program. And if they're able to get along to the Soccer Summit, which I believe this coming year will be in Hamilton, yep, we'll be able to network there and share a lot of great information with them.
Oh, fantastic. So that'll kind of tie me into the next question that came in a little bit about the planning and implementing session portion. So the specifically to the inclusion spectrum, as you mentioned, and that was quite interesting to, as you said, it's parallel to what we coach almost every day, but there are obviously some differences that need to be considered when you do deliver programs. What are some of the adaptations that you think are applicable when you said that the active start and fundamental programs within Ontario Soccer resources and even the resources with Canada Soccer are applicable to both. But you spoke a little bit about some adaptations. Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, so usually it ends up coming down to the safety component. So a lot of times there'll be situations where coaches are uncomfortable with an athlete with a disability, with using a wheelchair being on a field. But there are great examples where if you zone your field into thirds or to quarters, however you want to zone it, have that athlete with a wheelchair in a specific zone and have them work as a defender or a striker.
Okay.
But maybe unopposed. So maybe they're on the ball coming in and controlling it with their chair and then passing it forward onto the next zone. And in doing that, you're reducing the risk of injury of another player running into the wheelchair. But you're also giving that wheelchair user the opportunity to get a lot of contact time on the ball, rather than just, would typically happen. Somebody runs alongside, steals the ball off their toe and dribbles down the field. So that would be one adaptation. I'd also, when we do things like a blind soccer session, is have the guides on the field. So don't just throw a bunch of players on the field to play 5-on-5 all in eye shades. Build them up gently with the guides being on the field right there with them as well. So they might even want to still hold the guide's elbow or hand just to give them some reassurance. So you can sort of transition them into a full game of players all without sight. But in that first instance, you're sort of phasing it in with the guide being on the field as well.
Oh, that's fantastic. And you also spoke a little bit about specific equipment resources, correct? I think you mentioned tactile equipment.
Yeah. So we have all sorts of different types of balls of all sorts of shapes and sizes here at the club, and a lot of clubs find that's the best way to go. You're not going to find it in the soccer store. Often in these educational stores that provide stuff to kindergartens and elementary schools are fantastic places to find rubbery balls and squishy balls, rubberized surfaces. We have a ball here that has little fins on it, so that even when it's on a hard court, it doesn't roll away too quickly from the player. The fins help slow the ball down a little bit. And you may even have some players that I've seen a great example in the UK with a player that didn't have either of his legs. So he actually played soccer, but just used his hands and would punch the ball forward with his hands. So there's an example of getting a guy, he wasn't a kid, getting a guy on the field, but still using a typical size 5 soccer ball, but he's just using his hand. Other athletes might need something that's easier for them to grab. So it's really kind of thinking outside of the box, and that sort of creativity is a lot of fun when it comes to coaching. How do I get kid A on the field and help them become better as a striker or as a defender, or to even just gain some confidence? And the creativity there comes in the type of equipment that you might use or the way that they might participate in that session.
Absolutely, and that's great. So I think there's a lot of resources in here, specifically on this page you're showing, but also, as you mentioned, these different conferences, the different workshops to get different types of equipment and build that creative aspect of coaching to make it accessible and applicable to whatever group you're working with, which is fantastic. I think we have one last question that came in, and I don't know how to really word this together, but it ties a little bit to the qualifications of coaches that you kind of already did speak about. And you mentioned about U of T, if I'm not mistaken, correct? And their kin students looking to get involved in there. That's a great avenue for people that come from that background to get into coaching. But what about those who may not have that background? I know you do find volunteers within clubs, but if there are coaches who coach within it and they coach let's say U13 team, but they also want to get into coaching with the all ability programs, what are some resources or coach education per se that they can look into to start developing that I guess, knowledge and start enhancing it further so that they are able to build on that creative aspect and start helping in both streams per se?
That's a really good question. It's something that I think has huge potential to grow in the future. Those two educational links that I showed at the end there from the NCCP and the Canadian Tire Jumpstart program are a great two stepping stones that will help move a coach from running a typical U13 11v11 session to what some of the adaptations might be like for athletes with a disability, so they can start to see how things might change. And then I think the next step on from that is coming into a session and observing and, doing some mentoring, stepping on the field and, seeing what it's like to interact with different players and what things are different about an accessible session versus an 11v11 session. And it's nothing catastrophic. It's just the little finer points that they'd be able to pick up on. In an ideal world, and I think we'll get there in the near future, would be a coaching pathway within Canada Soccer that sort of models on the English model there of a coaching disabled footballers course. So you actually have an entry-level course where new and experienced coaches can come in. They can spend a 6 to 8 hour day learning, working in groups, going out onto the field and actually practicing and experiencing what it's like to work with different disability sport groups. And that's now evolved in England to two specific streams, one for blind and one for deaf and hearing impaired, so that you sort of already have two levels of coaching there for athletes with a disability. I think there's a lot of great resources here, whether it's online or written, that could be molded into a Canadian version of that coaching disabled, let's say, soccer players course in the future.
Wow, perfect. That is hopefully that does come down the streamline and it just continues to grow. But that is the last of our questions for tonight, Matt. So I just wanted to again thank you for taking your time out of your evening to jump on this webinar with us and share a lot of the information and really dive into some of these questions and actually break them out more, because that's what usually happens, right? As this webinar goes on, we end up building so many questions. Oh, that's interesting, but what does that mean here and here? But those questions were slow, they progressed and were answered. And even still, as more did come in, they were all tied in right back towards it and given answers with a great level of detail behind it to really help build on the foundation of accessible soccer across Ontario and to continue to grow these programs across the board. So again, thank you on behalf of myself and Ontario Soccer. And if there's anything else you'd like to add, I give it back to you.
I don't think so. I just say, my contact details are there. Let's put that stake in the ground and start to create these programs across the province and all being well across the country. I know that there's interest in this webinar from as far as Manitoba and Alberta, from people that are interested in starting their own programs. So let's keep working at it, keep networking, and hopefully we'll have every club in the province with their own accessible soccer programs serving their complete community.
Absolutely. Well, thanks again, Matt. And again, thank you for joining us on our last webinar series of 2019.
Thank you.